How far can a lie go? How long can one hide evil behind the mask of goodness? The perpetrator in today's story could answer these questions, but he will not. He created a positive image behind which a brutal murderer was concealed. In 2008, Nicholas Browning was 15 years old. He was described as a good boy and a diligent student. He was the oldest of the Browning children. His father worked as a real estate attorney for a large company. The man was a Boy Scout leader and taught Sunday school. He had a successful career, was respected, and well known in the community. The mother was a housewife, a kind and modest woman. Nicholas had two younger brothers who were 11 and 13 years old in 2011. The entire family lived in a house in the small town of Cockeysville, Maryland, USA, with about 20,000 inhabitants. It was a quiet, peaceful place where no one would expect a bloody tragedy of this scale. Nicholas was an excellent student and a Boy Scout attending high school. He was a tall, handsome young man, a member of the school's golf and lacrosse teams, and he had high hopes for the future. Many believed he had a bright life ahead of him. From the outside, the family's life seemed happy until a terrible tragedy occurred. On the afternoon of February 2, 2008, his parents were out with Nick in the family car. They dropped Nicholas off at a friend's house, where the boys were to spend the night. The teenagers planned to watch movies and play computer games. Nicholas got out of the car, and so did Taylor Tewksbury and Alexander Smith. All the boys were 15 years old. This was the last time the Browning family would be seen alive. The next morning, Nick, Taylor, and Alexander, who had spent the night at Ryan's house, were supposed to go home. Nicholas's parents had promised to pick him up in the morning, but they were late. He tried calling to find out what was going on, but the Brownings ignored all calls. The teenagers then decided to go to the mall with Ryan's father. After shopping, they took Nick home. On the way, he repeatedly called and texted his mother and father, but got no response. When they arrived at Nicholas's house, they immediately noticed the family car in the driveway, but the house was quiet. When the Browning son opened the door and went inside, he immediately understood why. A horrifying sight awaited him. The entire family had been shot. His 45-year-old father, John Browning, his 40-year-old mother, Tammy, and his two younger brothers, 13-year-old Gregory and 11-year-old Benjamin, were dead. Nicholas turned to Ryan's father, who was still standing outside. The man called emergency services and reported what had happened. Police officers arrived promptly. They found the teenagers in the courtyard. They appeared very upset. Nicholas, who seemed calm, immediately explained that it was a burglary gone wrong. He was sure that while he was at his friend's house overnight, a burglar had broken in and that the situation had escalated. According to him, his parents might have tried to stop the intruder, who then opened fire. However, there were no signs of a struggle at the scene of the massacre. The police found 4 bodies in different places, each killed by a single gunshot to the head. Even a brief inspection of the premises showed that nothing was missing. The furniture was intact, and many valuables were still in their place. There was no sign of forced entry or disorder. A botched robbery could be ruled out. Nicholas's words and behavior were too suspicious. Despite the teenagers' ages and their potential state of shock, all 4 boys were taken to the station for questioning. They were placed in separate rooms, so they couldn't coordinate their stories. The police first spoke with Taylor. He immediately seemed suspicious because he was very nervous. He spoke hesitantly before answering questions. The officers chose him first, believing him easy to break. The others, especially Nicholas, appeared more self-assured. According to Taylor, he and his 3 friends had spent the night at Ryan's house. They had arrived the day before the murder, shortly after school, along with the homeowner, while Alex and Nicholas arrived a bit later. The teenagers watched movies and played video games until late, until Ryan's parents sent them all to bed. Taylor claimed he heard or saw nothing suspicious during the night. After that, the investigator working with Taylor decided to take a break and talk to Nicholas in another room. In the officer's view, the boy behaved suspiciously. When he entered, Nicholas sat quietly with his head lowered. He seemed somewhat sleepy, which was strange considering that his entire family except him was dead. The policeman was friendly. He wanted the interaction to seem like a normal witness interview so that the student would trust him, speak truthfully, and not invoke his right to an attorney. The officer hoped to secure a confession without a defense attorney present, which would complicate matters. Nicholas remained composed and calm. He said he arrived home from school around 2:45 p.m. and that after a while, his parents decided to drive him to Ryan's house. The teenagers lived less than a kilometer apart, so they usually walked, but this time the Brownings gave him a ride simply because they happened to be going out. Nick repeated Taylor's account that the students played video games, watched movies all evening, and then went to bed. However, he admitted that at around 1 a.m., he left his friend's house and headed toward his parents' home. According to him, he wanted to steal the family car to take his friends on a joyride. His parents were not to find out about it. When he got to his house, he saw that the light in his parents' bedroom was on. At that moment, he was already in the car. He lay down on the backseat floor so he would not be seen. Nick worried that opening the car had made noise and alerted his parents. He did not want a reprimand from his strict father, so he stayed hidden. He planned to wait until the family settled and went to bed, as he didn't want to steal the car openly and cause even more trouble. Nick lay in the car for a while and fell asleep. He supposed that was when the shooting happened, and he simply didn't hear it. He woke up later and drove away. According to the medical examiner's report, the attack on the family took place around midnight, and everyone in the house was killed. All were taken by surprise. The first shot was fired at close range into John's head. The father was sleeping on the couch downstairs. Apparently, Tammy Browning and her 2 sons were asleep upstairs and were also shot in their sleep. The police believe Nicholas was involved in the massacre. Obviously, he wasn't telling them everything. Investigators found it odd that he had hidden in the family car instead of going back directly to Ryan's house. Moreover, he was the only survivor, meaning he must have been at the crime scene at the time of the shooting. According to Nick, however, he had heard nothing, which did not help his case. His statement that the light had been on was also suspicious because it was off when the police arrived. Given his claim of a robbery, it was unclear why burglars would turn a light on to steal and then turn it off again. Criminals usually don't bother. The suspect had no answers for these questions. The officers then spoke with Ryan. According to Ryan, he had dozed off and woke up around midnight. He noted that Nick was no longer in the house at that time. Investigators thus found a time discrepancy, suggesting that the teenagers were lying. Nick said he left at 1 a.m. Because of this discrepancy, investigators questioned Taylor again. He stated that Nicholas was indeed not in Ryan's house around midnight. When confronted with the other statements, he immediately changed his story, now claiming that his friend was still there at midnight. Taylor was noticeably more nervous and did not want to implicate his friend by telling the truth. The officer managed to calm him down, and Taylor said that after Nick left, he went straight to bed. Taylor knew his friend wanted to steal his parents' car and go for a drive, but he did not suggest that Nick was stuck there or attacked the family. Investigators spoke to Nicholas again and confronted him with his friend's new statements. The teenager now claimed he left his friend's house around 1 a.m. to get his car. He changed his story once more and said the light had always been on, and when he woke up, it was off. This meant the burglars, already in the house when he arrived, must have done it. In light of this, his attempt to hide in the car seemed absurd, as he could have simply driven off or waited by the roadside until the light went out. Nick continued to insist he had fallen asleep in the car, but how could he not have heard 4 gunshots? This time, he clarified that he woke up due to a phone call from his friend Alex at around 5 a.m. Instead of returning to his parents' house, he went back to his friend's home without the car. In reality, Alex broke all patterns. He reported that Nick had not left the house that night, but after hearing the other statements, he too changed his story. Alex now said that Nicholas left the house at 11:45 p.m., but claimed he fell asleep at midnight and did not wake until 5 a.m. Alex noticed that Nick was not in his room, so he called him on his cell phone. He admitted that his friend had to sneak into his parents' house to get the car keys before stealing it. But if Nicholas did not have the keys at first, how could he have gotten into the car and waited there? During the night's questioning, Investigators obtained statements from all the teenagers. Their accounts raised many questions and doubts due to inconsistencies. Then a man arrived at the station who played a key role in solving the crime. Mr. Petcher, who turned out to be Ryan's stepfather, the one with whom the friends had spent the night. He said the children were to be picked up at 9 a.m. because the mother wanted to involve her son in house cleaning. But no one came or called at the set time. The students ate breakfast and waited. Starting around 11 a.m., Nicholas began calling and leaving messages for his family, all ignored. Although suspicion of Nicholas grew, he tried to remain calm. During conversations, he sometimes even laughed and joked. Investigators believed he was trying to deceive them. The young man pretended to be an innocent lamb, but the investigators knew that beneath the surface lurked a wolf. Ryan's stepfather said that Nick was unusually calm and not worried about his parents' absence that morning. For some reason, he did not hurry to go home, even though it was only a 20-minute walk. Instead, he went to the mall with his friend and the friend's father, waiting for his parents to respond to his calls. Only on the way back did they stop at his house. The police saw this behavior as confirmation of their suspicions. The murderer simply did not want to return to the crime scene and wanted to buy time. When the group returned to Nicholas's house, the friends entered through the garage. Nicholas himself tried to stop his friends from entering the house with him, which was unusual. The teenager pointed out to them that the door was open, which he found strange. Nick emphasized to everyone several times that his family always locked their doors. According to the stepfather, Nick repeated this remark multiple times before going in. They went through the living room, with Nicholas leading. The first thing he saw was his father, covered in blood, lying on the couch. Nick screamed. The other friends saw the body and immediately ran out so as not to go any further. The school children told Ryan's stepfather what they had seen. The man didn't believe it and ran inside himself. When he saw John's body, he immediately called emergency services to the Brownings' address. Meanwhile, Nick went upstairs and found his mother and brothers also lifeless. During questioning, Nicholas confirmed all this. However, what scared the police most was his calm demeanor. It seemed as though he felt nothing at all, not something you'd expect from someone who had just lost his entire family. According to Ryan, after discovering that his whole family had been murdered, Nick went back outside and reported it to the others quite casually. The teenagers didn't want to see any of it. Nick informed Ryan's stepfather and his friends that he had found his family shot to death and immediately declared it a robbery, remaining completely calm. This was surprising. The other teenagers confirmed that they ran outside upon seeing the pale, bloody Browning in the living room. The police searched the house thoroughly, hoping to find clues and figure out what happened, but found nothing. At this point, Nicholas headed to the back of the house, toward the rear entrance. There, he saw his Xbox and laptop on the pool table. He then concluded that the thieves had tried to steal these items, but something had stopped them. After these remarks, the police realized that the robbery theory was unsustainable. The teenager was simply trying to mislead them. Obviously, thieves would have taken valuable electronic devices in plain sight. Officers continued searching the area around the massacre and questioned neighbors for witnesses and possible leads. Thus, the story became public. People were shocked and tried to understand what had happened to the Brownings. Later, while trying to justify himself, Nick admitted that the car keys had been in his jacket pocket the entire time. He remembered them while visiting his friend and hatched the plan to steal the car at that moment. Investigators didn't understand why he had not mentioned this right away. They were sure the young man was hiding something and lying again. Alex's recollection finally sealed their doubts. The teenager said Nicholas had called home before leaving and asked his brothers to leave the back door open, but it wasn't clear why. After that, investigators had no doubt that the teenager was guilty of killing those closest to him. Nick told investigators that his father owned 2 firearms and had taken him hunting several times, so he knew how to handle rifles and pistols. Furthermore, friends of the suspect said he had multiple conflicts with his father, who had caught him drinking alcohol. Nicholas himself believed that a neighbor named Bobby, who used illegal substances and had repeatedly clashed with the law, could have committed such a bloody act. The investigators, however, saw this only as an attempt to shift blame and divert suspicion. There was no evidence against Bobby, and he had a solid alibi. When the investigators publicly declared Nicholas the main suspect, the teenager became visibly nervous, insisting on his innocence. The police used good cop, bad cop tactics, repeatedly changing their approach to confirm their suspicions and get a confession, all to no avail. By this time, forensic examiners discovered that a 9mm pistol was missing from the father's locker. According to them, a similar weapon had been used to kill the family. The investigators wanted to know where the young man had hidden the murder weapon. The interrogation lasted about 6 hours. Even when asked repeatedly, Nick stuck to his claim of innocence. The police pressed him again and again. The longer it lasted, the more his story changed. During the investigation, it emerged that the relationship between the parents and their eldest son, Nick, was strained and had worsened recently. Realizing he was cornered, the main suspect said his parents were very cruel people. For years, he claimed, he had been subjected to their moral and physical pressure. During the interrogation, Nicholas repeatedly asked if, instead of life imprisonment, he could hope for forced treatment in a psychiatric facility. The investigators avoided answering, but this suspicious interest worked against him. He was obviously aware of his guilt and hoped there was a chance to reduce his sentence. He still believed the jury would accept the story he had told the investigators. At the end of the interrogation, there was sufficient evidence against Nick, but no clear motive. According to his friends, Nick had argued with his father shortly before the murders. Eventually, he described several incidents in which his father was rude to him and even physically attacked him. In the fall, their relationship had worsened significantly. One reason was that the boy had previously stolen the family car and been caught. This put him on probation and affected him negatively. His behavior got worse, which didn't please his parents. The father was strict and tried to discipline his son. Nicholas claimed that on the very day he went to his friends, things reached a critical point because his father had beaten him again in the morning for trivial reasons. The police suspected that the beating had been provoked by the teenager's disobedience. According to his friends, he was going through puberty, displaying a rebellious streak that naturally met with parental resistance. Tensions rose, especially after his father caught him drinking multiple times. Nicholas justified himself by saying that he drank to escape his problems. Several of Nick's relatives supported these statements, describing his father as rather strict, but they did not believe he would beat his son without reason. In talks with classmates and those close to the suspect, the police found that the conditions for this massacre had been building long before the teenager decided to pull the trigger. It remained unclear why he killed his mother and brothers, who had done nothing to him. His friends from that fateful night confirmed that they had heard Nick make joking remarks multiple times about killing his family. He called his mother a dumb blonde, his father an abusive drunk, and said he hated them. No one took these words seriously. Many classmates had heard him say he couldn't stand his father's torment and moralizing anymore. Although many described Nick as a hard-working, quiet, and good-natured guy, his closest friends knew he had a dark side. Outside school, he often beat his younger brothers quite severely, stole alcohol from his father's bar, and took the car without permission. It also emerged that he bullied younger students and people with disabilities at school. It turned out that after the massacre, upon returning to his friend's house, Nicholas tried to organize a party at his own home for that afternoon. This would coincide with the discovery of the victims. Apparently, he wanted to divert suspicion from himself. While forensic experts were working at the Brownings' home, more and more teenagers arrived for the canceled party, shocked by the reason. Eventually, Nicholas began to talk. He confessed to killing his parents and younger brothers, but told a completely unbelievable story. He said that when he returned home during the sleepover, he snuck in and saw his father asleep on the sofa. Intense anger rose in him. Nick knew where the weapon was kept, took it, and then supposedly spent about half an hour thinking about what to do. He dared to see if anyone had woken, but apparently no one heard anything. They were all sleeping. But the teenager didn't stop there. The murderer then went upstairs, first shot his mother, then entered his brother's room and shot both of them. According to Nick's own words, He killed his brothers because they could have reported him to the police, as he had asked them the night before to leave the door open. That would have indicated premeditation. However, he emphasized that he killed each family member with a single shot to the head, as he did not want them to suffer. Nicholas led the police to where he had hidden the weapon. The murder weapon was found in a bush on the property. A ballistic test confirmed it was used in the killings, and DNA traces belonging to the suspect were found on the gun. Eventually, the juvenile offender was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. For many, the boy's image had been so positive that they wrote letters to the court asking for leniency. One such letter came from Nicholas's grandfather, who claimed the teenager had indeed been under physical and emotional pressure from his father for years. Some simply couldn't believe Nick was capable of such a thing. While awaiting trial, just 2 days before it began, Nick was in custody and had a phone conversation with a friend. Naturally, it was monitored. During the call, the teenager joked about escaping. He never showed remorse or seemed to recognize the extent of his guilt. At the hearing, however, things changed dramatically. At one point, Nicholas burst into tears and tearfully addressed his relatives, saying how sorry he was. The prosecution used this contrast to show the jury the defendant's duplicity. The defense attorney tried to paint a picture of a positive young man who could not possibly be a cold-blooded murderer. These conflicting portrayals were the most fascinating aspect of the hearings. The prosecution highlighted the teenager's cruel side, which he had tried so hard to hide, according to many witnesses. The defense tried equally hard to polish his image by pointing out his social standing, his involvement in the Boy Scouts, and his excellent academic record. During the sessions, Nicholas was so overwhelmed by his emotions that he couldn't read his apology speech. His lawyer read it for him. The words sounded eloquent. Yet that same evening, he spoke on the phone with his girlfriend Stephanie, angrily declaring that he hated her. One of the defendant's friends, Ryan, said that any alleged abuse didn't explain why Nicholas opened fire. He knew his friend as a decent guy who kept a cool head despite his father's constant pressure and punishment. Nor did it explain why he would kill his mother and younger brothers. According to this friend, the real motive might have been money. The family was well off and the parents had insurance. A staged robbery could have allowed him to claim a large inheritance. The teenager claimed to have been abused by both his father and his mother. He alleged not only John had pressured him, but also his mother morally oppressed him. No one believed the mother's cruelty. The Brownings were honorable, respectable people, and nobody who knew them ever noticed signs of abuse against Nicholas. Close family friends knew the teenager had recently become uncontrollable and increasingly violent and unpredictable, something both parents complained about. His feeble attempt to plead insanity was immediately dismissed. A psychiatric evaluation revealed no psychological abnormalities. He had no mental health issues in the past, no disorders, and no suicidal thoughts. At the same time, his lawyer insisted that Nick be placed in a psychiatric facility with a rehabilitation program for juvenile offenders. The defense believed none of the supposed motives sounded convincing. Even if money was involved, he wouldn't have access to it until adulthood. Moreover, Nicholas would have ended up in foster care, which, from his perspective, could be worse than living with his parents. A psychiatric assessment confirmed the teenager was mentally competent. In court, the lawyer could not claim mental impairment. Because such crimes are punishable by death under state law, Nick's life was at stake. However, he was too young to receive the death penalty. In January 2009, Nicholas made a deal with the prosecution. The 16-year-old murderer pleaded guilty to all charges. The court sentenced him to 4 life sentences, with 2 to be served consecutively. Due to his youthful age and the agreement, he can be released on parole after serving 23 years in 2031. The main condition for parole is good behavior. Nicholas Browning is currently incarcerated at the Cumberland Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland. In 2014, he requested a review of his sentence, which was denied. Note that a lifer's parole in Maryland requires the governor's approval, which hasn't happened since 1994. This suggests the young offender will likely never experience freedom. In the summer of 2022, the now 30-year-old Nicholas filled out a questionnaire on a dating website and added photos of himself. He posted it intending to find people he could confide in. He boasted about his accomplishments while in prison. He not only finished school, but also earned a bachelor's degree and is now working on an MBA. His questionnaire ended with the following words: "I've done my best to lead a somewhat normal life here. I've had the incredible luck of having friends who have taught me so much and shown me so much love. They helped me grow beyond the frightened, angry child I once was. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves."